Hello, I'm Jerry Fort. I'm going to read a story out of this book here called The Scary States of America, 50 Weird and Terrifying Stories, one from each state based on true events by Michael Teitelbaum. So the state I'm going to read is Wyoming, and it's the last state in this book. So I finally accomplished reading this whole book. The name of this story is called Dead Man Talking. Instead of dead man walking, we got a dead man talking. Please excuse my nasally voice right now. I'm fighting a cold, so hopefully you can understand what I say. Okay. I'm going to leave you with a tale that still haunts me some nights. I do a lot better these days coming face to face with the paranormal than I did that first time in the gym locker, way back in 4th grade. Still, scary is scary and weird is weird, no matter how many times you stare it in the eye on a trip. No matter how many times you stare it in the eye. Period. On a trip out west, I visited the Wyoming Frontier Prison in Rawlins, Wyoming. The prison closed in 1981 after operating for 80 years. Some of the pioneers, however, didn't seem to notice the closing. They decided to stay anyway. Of course, the pioneers I'm talking about died a long time ago. The old pen, as the prison is known, is now a museum, but as I discovered, it's haunted. Visitors can tour the cell blocks and death row. The prospects of that tour is what kept me going, during a visit out west to some relatives. I had read about the old pen before our trip, so I knew that other paranormal detectives and ghost hunters had already recorded images of ghostly orbs, psychic energy fields, and disembodied voices. Tour guides have reported seeing vague circles of light pass through solid walls. They told of hearing heavy footsteps after the museum had closed, but finding no one when they traced the location of the sounds. Some guides said that they had seen prisoners walking the halls and retreating into rooms. The guides followed them, but discovered only empty cells. Of course, there have been no prisoners, in parentheses, no living ones anyway, in the old pen for more than 20 years. But none of these stories prepared me for what I found when I entered the large stone building. My cousin dropped me off. She had no interest at all in a haunted prison, and I told her that I'd call her when it was time to pick me up. I was part of an evening tour that began in pretty typical fashion. The tour guide, Hillary Beckett, outlined the history of the prison, beginning with its formation in post-Civil War, Wild West, Wyoming. She told us tales of lawless desperados, bold train robberies, women committing murderous crimes of passion, and inmates staging daring escapes. The tour was fun, but I saw and heard no sign of anything paranormal. Until we reached death row, that is. This section of the prison felt especially dark and depressing. Hillary related stories of men awaiting execution, some for years. It was here that she briefly touched on the rumors that the spirits of the executed haunted the prison. But she ended her remarks with a dismissive, "If you believe that sort of thing." Resisting the urge to shout out, "I believe that sort of thing," I was startled to discover that he didn't actually scream it out. I just read it like he did. I was startled to discover that one of the cells had a light on. "Why does that cell have a light on?" I asked. Well, that's odd, Hillary replied. I really don't know. She reached through the bars of cell number 485 and switched off the light. As the tour rounded a corner and left death row, I glanced back at cell 485. To my astonishment, I saw the cell was once again lit. Following behind the group, I quietly walked back to the cell and peered through the cold metal bars. There was no one around, and no one behind our tour group who could have turned the light on. As I stared into the gray cell, which contained nothing more than a cot and a toilet, I heard a voice. A strained, plaintive cry drifted out of the cell. Innocent. I jumped back, shocked by the sound. I looked around. There was no one near me, and there was definitely no one in the cell. I stepped back up to the cell. Innocent, cried the desperate voice again. Where was it coming from? Young man. That sounded funny with my nose all plugged up. Boomed a voice from behind me. I nearly hit the roof. I was so startled. I turned around to see Hillary Beckett glaring down at me. It wasn't the ghost. It was her. Young man, how's that? Boomed a voice from behind me. I nearly hit the roof. I was so startled. I turned around to see Hillary Beckett glaring down at me. Sorry. Oh. You'll have to keep up with the tour, and you should not have turned that light back on. Were you the one who turned it on the first time? No, I cried, and I didn't turn it on this time either. Then why is it on? She asked, again switching off the light. She gave me a look that clearly said, I don't have time for childish pranks. Whatever, I whispered, the hair on the back of my neck still standing. I knew what I had heard, but I decided it was best not to bring it up with a skeptic like Hillary. The tour ended, and I browsed the museum's gift shop, trying to look like I was really interested in the postcards, keychains, and books. I wasn't. I was just killing time. I had no intention of leaving the prison before I checked out that cell again. My cousin could wait. I had to find out what was going on in there. Shortly before the museum closed, I slipped out of the gift shop and hurried off to a dark corner of the prison. Squatting in the deep shadows, I heard the last visitors leave and the door slam. Panic seized me. I felt trapped. I was being locked inside a prison. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had sentenced myself to a horrible night in this terrifying, depressing place. But I had to go back to that cell. When the place had been totally silent for a few minutes, I stood up and made my way quietly through the empty prison. My scuffling footsteps echoed off the grimy cinder block. Mixed in with the echoes, I could just make out whispering voices, sad, angry, desperate voices, pleading for mercy. I pressed on, and the smell of human waste and filth washed over me, mixed with something else that was putrid and unfamiliar, the smell of death. I rounded the corner and stepped back onto death row. The din of hopeless voices grew louder. The dark hallway was lit by only a handful of dim bulbs. I moved slowly along this line of cells. I was almost back at cell 485. As I moved to step in front of the cell, the light blazed on. I jumped back, keeping out of the yellow glow pouring into the gray hallway. The moment the light came on, all the voices fell silent. Now the quiet was eerie, almost unbearable. Glancing back over my shoulder to make sure that I was totally alone, I stepped into the light in front of the cell once again. Once again, I surveyed its cold, stark emptiness, and then I heard the voice again. Innocent, it cried, thin but clear. I pressed my face between two of the bars, the chill of the metal shooting into my cheeks. Who are you? I stammered. Innocent, it repeated. Louder now, more agitated. I stood there for a few minutes, listening to the same sad voice repeat that single word. I had to learn more. Hurrying down death row, I turned the corner, then I paused and peered back around. The light in cell 485 was off again. The hallway was dark. I made my way to the prison's lowest level, where I remembered Hillary pointed out the old records office. Luckily, it was unlocked. The night watchman must not have made his rounds yet. I slipped inside. It took me a few minutes to shuffle through various boxes and cabinets, but then I came upon the prisoner records, looking up cell 485. I found my answer right away. Cedric Malcove was the last prisoner to occupy cell 485 on death row. He was also the last person executed at the Wyoming Frontier prison before it closed. Pulling Malcove's file from the drawer, I began reading. Cedric Malcove, age 41, was convicted of the murder of George Jeffries and sentenced to death. He was executed at Wyoming Frontier Prison on January 22, 1981. Malcove maintained his innocence up until the moment of his death. He claimed that he had been framed and that the real killer still walked free. Maintained his innocence. That phrase bounced around in my brain. Apparently, Cedric Malcove is still claiming his innocence, even after his execution. I closed the file and put it away. Then I stepped from the office and bumped right into the museum's night watchman. Uh-oh. I fell back in fear. I was caught. "Well, what have we here?" the man asked. He was an elderly gentleman, so he sounded like, "Well, what have we here?" He was an elderly gentleman with white hair peeking out from beneath his cap. He wore a blue security uniform. Anxious to get a taste of what it's like to spend the night in prison? That's him saying, he says. Anxious to get a taste of what it's like to spend the night in prison? He says, you wouldn't be the first curious visitor to stay behind after we close. I was about to lock you in the records room. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't mean to break any rules. I just heard something in cell 45, and I... Old Cedric, huh? The guard said, smiling. He doesn't speak to just anyone. You must be special. Oh, I've heard him, but I never could convince the museum directors that he was real. But he's real, all right, and I know he's innocent. Am I in trouble? I asked nervously. I think we can avoid it. He says, I think we can avoid executing you this time, the guard said, smiling again. Then he introduced himself as Sam Cliveson. I thanked him and headed out of the prison. I dialed my cousin to come pick me up, certain that I had encountered the ghost of Cedric Malcove. My trip out west ended a couple of days later, but I couldn't get that voice out of my mind. Back home, over the next few months, I kept up with the online edition of the Daily Times, the Rollins newspaper. There were mentions from time to time in the paper of the mysterious light in death row cell 485 and of the ghost of Cedric Malcove crying out his innocence. Then one day, about 6 months after my visit, I was stunned to read the huge one-word headline blazing across the front page of the Daily Times. Innocent. The story went on to reveal that new DNA evidence had come to light in the Cedric Malcove murder case, proving the claim that Malcove had made all along. He was innocent. The DNA evidence connected another prisoner with the murder of George Jeffries and also with the second homicide, the murder of the prison's night watchman. But, oh crap. He was innocent. The DNA evidence connected another prisoner with the murder of George Jeffries and also with a second homicide, the murder of the prison's night watchman, Sam Cliveson. So that dude was talking to a ghost. That old that old night watchman. I fell back on my chair and rolled halfway across the room. It was impossible. I'd met Sam Cliveson 6 months ago. How could he have been murdered in the early 1980s? I decided to call the prison and ask for Sam. "Is this some kind of joke?" said the man who answered the phone. "If it is, it's in very bad taste. Sam Cliveson was a friend of mine, and he was murdered over 20 years ago. They just found his killer. It's in the paper." I dropped the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. Sam Cliveson was not the first ghost I had met during my travels, but learning that I've had a conversation with a dead man always creeps me out. A sidebar to the Daily Times cover story said that the light in the cell 45 had stopped coming on, and the mournful cry of innocent could no longer be heard. Apparently, Cedric Malcove was finally rested in peace. I only hope that Sam Cliveson is as well. Wild. So there you go. Wyoming. Dead man talking. All right. If you like books like this, the paranormal, you collect them. You're into this stuff, get you a copy of this book here. By Michael Teitelbaum, The Scary States of America. 50 weird and terrifying stories, one from each state, based on true events. All right, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Thanks for putting up with my nasally reading. I appreciate that as well, and we'll see you on the next one.